Hey guys, GreatGamer34 here. So we're doing a PC build today, and so to start off the build, we're going to start with a Gigabyte Gaming B350 chipset motherboard, obviously from Gigabyte. It's got RGB on it, and everything in this build is going to be RGB compatible. For storage, we have a 2 terabyte hard drive in here from Western Digital. It's 5400 RPMs. We also have a Wi-Fi stick, so because he's not going to have Ethernet where you're going to be gaming. 500 gigabyte SSD, it's a PCIe M.2 drive. We have 16 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM at 3200 megahertz, and it's RGB. And here's the power supply. It's a 450 watt small form factor power supply. And the reason we have a small form factor power supply is because the case here is a Thermaltake Core G3, and it's a very small form factor ATX case that requires a small form factor power supply. Then the power horse of the build is the Ryzen 7 1700, not the X, so it's the lower TDP version, but it's got the Wraith Inspire cooler, so it's RGB cooler on it. And then the thing that's going to be driving this build is the GTX 1080 from MSI, which is Seahawk edition, so it's actually liquid cooled out of the box here. Oh, and last thing, the monitor. It's a 24-inch, I think, 2K monitor from Asus. I'm not sure the exact product number. Alright, so here's the motherboard taken out of the case, or out of the box. We're going to install the RAM in the 1 and 2 slots here first. We're going to install our SSD into the M.2 drive right there, and then the CPU will go in last. So let's start with the RAM. So it comes in a clamshell. I'm going to open it without breaking anything. And how does this open? Just like that. Perfect. Wow, that's a hefty heatsink with the RGB light right there. This is a nice stick of RAM. Alright, so we just line up the slot here with the slot on there. It looks like it has to go like this. So we'll stick it in like that. And there's one stick installed. Do the same thing with this guy. Second stick installed. Now we're going to go ahead and do our SSD. Cover. Grab a screwdriver wherever I put them. I'm going to have to unscrew the screw from the board. Put it in there to hold it. Just like that, and then put the screw back in. Oh, there's another screw there. Oh, gotta unscrew that. Come on. Hardest part is screwing it in. There we go, that's in. Now we're going to install the CPU. So the CPU is actually, it's right here. So it's a Ryzen 7 1700, like I said earlier. And we got to make sure it lines up with the golden triangle that's actually right here in the top left corner. So let's go ahead and pop this open. So there's a golden triangle right here on the CPU in that corner. And then that lines up with this triangle right on the top there. Just checking the CPU to make sure that this is the right socket, because I've heard that there's a lot of RMA frauds lately, where people would take a CPU, buy a CPU, brand new one, and then return it with an older one in it. So just making sure that this isn't the case with this one, and it's not. So we've got to be careful not to touch the pins. But there's a golden triangle in the top left, or top right. So you're going to rotate it like this. And just set it in. And the CPU is installed. And that is everything that's going on the motherboard right now.
Yeah, that was easy.
Alright, so now we're going to install the heatsink into the motherboard. The first thing I had to do was I had to remove these the stands that were on it that came with the motherboard, therefore a aftermarket heatsink. So here's our heatsink from AMD that came with the CPU, and they're actually really nice, so we're going to use it. And it just sits right on top of here. Just like that. And then it gets screwed down. So we go bottom left and then top right. And then we go bottom right and top left. Now you do it in a crisscross pattern so you don't over torque one side. And then you just keep repeating that pattern back and forth until the heatsink's on securely. Alright, we'll go around one more time just to make sure it's on there tight. Okay, and then now we just have to plug in the CPU fan. And there's a header right up here that says CPU fan, so we'll plug it right onto that guy. And that is installed. Alright guys, so now we're going to install the motherboard into the case, and to do that you first want to make sure you install the I/O backplate first and not last, because you have to take out everything to do it. So make sure the orientation is correct and pop it in the back here. You'll hear it. And then that's in, and then this goes right in as well. You gotta angle it, and then it just sits right in on top of the standoffs that were provided. Just like that. And then we screw it in. Alright, so we just got the power supply installed off camera. It's just 4 screws for this small form factor power supply. And so now we have the few cables that we're going to need. So it was a modular power supply. So we need to first make sure that we have the cables that we need plugged in. So we need the 24+2 pin for the motherboard power. And so that plugs into the back here. Kind of wonky like. I'll do that one last. And then we have our 8-pin connector here. This is for the CPU power, which will plug in up here. And then we have our SATA power for our 2TB hard drive. And then we also have a PCIe with a 6+2 pin on it for the graphics card. And so we'll be back when it's installed. Alright, so we got the cables installed to the power supply, and now we actually have to connect them to the motherboard. So here's the 24+2 pin. I'm just going to plug in behind the RAM slot. Just like that. Then we have our PCIe, which we'll save for the power for the graphics card. We have the 8-pin power for the CPU, which comes up here. And then we have our SATA for the hard drives, and we put those in. And that's it for now. Power on self-test. Look at all the RGB. So the PC is up and running, and we're installing Windows onto it right now. We had an issue where the PCIe riser card for the graphics card up here, it was bent in a weird way and it wasn't getting connection, so we actually had to take that out and then reinstall it in a different slot. But everything is working now, so the $1,650 PC that actually boots, so it's not a waste of money.